It began like any other taping day until everything stopped. Steve Harvey had seen families of all shapes and sizes stand at those podiums. Loud families who couldn't stop talking over each other. Quiet families who communicated in glances. Competitive families who treated the game like warfare. Sweet families who just seemed happy to be there. But when the Williams family walked onto the stage that Tuesday morning in March, something felt different. Not wrong, exactly. Just different. Like the air around them carried weight. There were 4 women. 4, when there should have been 5. The team captain, Keisha Williams, early 40s, with eyes that held too much knowledge and a smile that looked like it cost her something to maintain. Her 2 sisters, Tamara and Jasmine, flanking her on either side like bookends, their hands occasionally reaching out to touch her arm, her shoulder, her back. Her mother, Gloria, silver-haired and regal, standing with the kind of dignity that comes from surviving things that should have broken you. And her aunt, Patricia, who kept her arm wrapped around Gloria's waist like she was holding her up. 4 women. And an empty space. Steve noticed it during the introductions. That gap in their formation. Most families spread out to fill the podium, maximizing their presence, claiming their space. But the Williams family stood clustered to one side, leaving room. Like they were making space for someone who wasn't there. Or maybe someone who was there, just not in a way the cameras could see. The opposing family, the Hendersons from Nashville, were enthusiastic and loud, filling the studio with energy. Standard setup, standard energy. The kind of wholesome competition that made for good television. But Steve's attention kept returning to the Williams family. To the way they stood so close. To the careful way they looked at each other. To the empty space they refused to fill. And then he saw the shirts. Custom-made t-shirts, all matching, in a deep purple. Each woman wore one, and across the back, in elegant script, was a name, Aaliyah. And underneath in smaller letters, Forever 17, Forever Loved, Forever with Us. Steve Harvey had been in television long enough to recognize grief when he saw it. Long enough to understand that some families come to game shows not for prizes or fame, but for something else entirely. For a moment of joy in the middle of sorrow. For permission to laugh again. For proof that life continues even after loss. He didn't know the story yet. Didn't know about the girl who should have been standing in that empty space. Didn't know about the night 6 months ago when a mother's world ended. Didn't know about the decision this family had made to show up anyway, to play anyway, to keep living even though living felt impossible. But he would. During the commercial break, that 7-minute window when the cameras stopped rolling and the audience stretched and the makeup artists rushed in to fix shine and powder, Steve Harvey did what he always did. He walked over to talk to the families, to build rapport, to find the stories that made people human instead of contestants. It was his gift, this ability to connect, to make people feel seen in a world that so often looked past them. He approached Keisha first, the team captain. She was staring at something in her hands, a photograph, he realized as he got closer. A teenage girl with her mother's eyes and a smile that could light up rooms. "That your daughter?" Steve asked gently. Keisha looked up, and in her eyes, Steve saw something that made his chest tighten. Not just sadness, not just grief, but something deeper, something that looked like survival, like choosing to breathe when breathing hurts. "Yes," she said quietly. "This is Aaliyah." Steve waited. He had learned over the years that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply wait. Give people space to speak or not speak, to share or not share, to trust you with their stories or keep them close. Keisha took a breath, then another. Her sisters moved closer, their presence a silent offer of support. And then, in a voice that shook but didn't break, she told him the story that would change everything. Aaliyah Williams had been 17 years old when she died, a junior in high school, an honor student, a girl who loved art and poetry and long conversations about everything and nothing, a girl who made her mother laugh, a girl who seemed fine. That was the part Keisha kept coming back to. Seemed fine. How many times had she replayed those last weeks, those last days, those last hours, searching for signs she should have seen? How many times had she tortured herself with the word should have noticed, should have asked, should have known that, "I'm fine, Mom," Sometimes means I'm drowning and I don't know how to tell you. It was a Tuesday evening in September. Aaliyah had come home from school, eaten dinner with her mother, done her homework at the kitchen table, while Keisha graded papers. She was a teacher, 4th grade, the kind who knew every student's story and kept granola bars in her desk for the ones who came to school hungry. They had talked about normal things. A test coming up, a friend's drama, what to have for dinner the next night. Normal. Everything was normal, until it wasn't. Keisha found her the next morning, her beautiful, brilliant, broken daughter, who had carried pain too heavy for a 17-year-old to bear and had decided in a moment or over months. Keisha would never know which, that the world would be better without her in it, that her mother would be better, that everyone would be better. She was wrong. God, she was so wrong. The grief that followed wasn't the kind you see in movies. It wasn't elegant or poetic or bounded by any reasonable timeline. It was ugly and raw and endless. It was waking up every morning and forgetting for 3 seconds before remembering and having your heart break all over again. It was walking past her daughter's bedroom and being unable to open the door. It was hearing a song on the radio and having to pull over because you couldn't see through the tears. It was questioning everything: your parenting, your awareness, your worth as a mother. Keisha's family had surrounded her immediately. Her mother Gloria moved in for a month, sleeping on the couch, making sure Keisha ate, forcing her to get out of bed, even when bed felt like the only safe place. Her sisters called every day, sometimes multiple times a day, just to hear her voice, to make sure she was still breathing. Her Aunt Patricia organized the funeral, handled the logistics, did all the things Keisha couldn't do because she could barely remember her own name. The community rallied too. Keisha's students drew pictures, parents brought food, colleagues covered her classes. The school held a memorial service where hundreds of people showed up to honor a girl who had thought no one would miss her. But grief, as Keisha learned, isn't something you move through and past. It's something you learn to carry. Some days the weight is manageable. Other days it crushes you. 6 months had passed. 6 months of therapy and grief groups, and midnight crying sessions, and learning to function as a human being again. 6 months of trying to understand the incomprehensible. 6 months of missing her daughter with an ache so profound it had its own pulse. And then, one evening in February, Keisha's sister Tamara had shown up at her door with a laptop and a crazy idea. "We're auditioning for Family Feud," Tamara had announced. Keisha had stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "What? You, me, Jasmine, Mom, Aunt Patricia? We're going to be on Family Feud." "Tamara, I can't, I'm not." "Yes, you can, and you will." Tamara's voice was firm but gentle. "You know what Aaliyah loved? She loved watching that show with you. You used to shout answers at the TV together. Remember?" Keisha did remember. Thursday nights, mother and daughter on the couch, competing to see who could guess the answers first, laughing at the ridiculous responses, making fun of Steve Harvey's facial expressions. It had been their thing. One of many things that were now just memories. "She would want you to keep living," Jasmine said, appearing in the doorway behind Tamara. "Not just existing, living." "We're not trying to replace her," Gloria added, her voice thick. "We could never. But we can honor her. We can show up for her. We can play for her." And that's how it started. The audition video they submitted wasn't polished or particularly funny. It was 5 women in matching purple shirts, Aaliyah's favorite color, standing in Keisha's living room, talking about family and love and the girl they were missing. They talked about mental health awareness, about breaking the stigma, about how sometimes the people who seem the strongest are the ones struggling the most. They didn't think they'd get chosen. There were thousands of families auditioning. Why would producers pick them? But 3 weeks later, the call came. They wanted the Williams family in Los Angeles for a taping in March. The family made a decision together. They would leave the 5th spot empty. They would wear shirts with Aaliyah's name. They would play, but they would play for 2. For the 4 women standing at the podium, and the 1 girl who should have been there but wasn't. When they won the prize money, if they won, they had already decided what they would do with it. They would start a youth mental health program at their community center. Free counseling, support groups, a safe space for kids who felt like Aaliyah had felt. A place where "I'm fine" could become "I'm struggling," without shame, without judgment, without fear. Because if they couldn't save their girl, maybe they could save someone else's. Steve Harvey stood very still as Keisha told him. His microphone was off. The cameras weren't rolling. This moment existed in that liminal space between performance and reality, where television stops being television and becomes something more raw, more true. Keisha's voice trembled as she explained about Aaliyah, about the suicide, about finding her daughter, about the 6 months of trying to breathe underwater, of trying to survive a loss that felt unsurvivable. Her sisters held her hands. Her mother's arm wrapped around her waist. They formed a circle of support, of survival, of love that refused to quit even when quitting seemed like the only option. "We left the 5th spot for her," Keisha said, gesturing to the empty space on their podium. "She was supposed to be here with us. She loved this show, loved watching you. And we just—" Her voice broke. "We couldn't leave her behind, even though she left us." Steve Harvey's eyes filled with tears. His carefully maintained composure, the host persona, the comedian's mask stripped away completely. He pulled Keisha into a hug, and then the other women, gathering them close. The stage crew, watching from the wings, went quiet. The makeup artists stopped mid-touch-up. The producers in the control booth leaned closer to their monitors, understanding that something profound was unfolding. "I'm so sorry," Steve said, his voice rough. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Keisha whispered. "We're trying to turn it into something. The prize money, if we win, we're starting a mental health program for kids like Aaliyah, kids who are struggling but don't know how to ask for help." Steve pulled back, holding Keisha at arm's length, looking directly into her eyes. "When you win," he corrected. "When you win, not if." The stage manager called a 30-second warning. Time to resume. Time to put the show back together, to return to the game, to pretend everything was normal. But Steve Harvey knew that nothing about this would be normal. How could it be? How could he stand up there and joke and perform when 5 feet away stood a mother who had buried her child? When every answer they gave, every point they scored, every moment they stood at that podium was an act of defiance against grief? He couldn't, so he wouldn't. The cameras came back on. The audience settled. But Steve Harvey didn't return to his mark with his usual swagger. He walked slowly, deliberately, his face still showing the evidence of tears. He positioned himself at center stage and looked directly at the camera. "Before we continue," he said quietly, "I need to tell y'all something." The audience went silent, sensing the shift in energy. Steve turned to the Williams family. "This family right here is playing today for someone who can't be here. Keisha's daughter, Aaliyah, passed away 6 months ago. She was 17 years old. And this family," his voice caught, "this family loved her so much that they left a space for her. They're playing for 2, for the 4 women you see and the one you don't." You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. 300 people held their collective breath. "And I want everyone watching to understand something," Steve continued. "Mental health matters. Depression is real. Suicide doesn't just take one life, it shatters dozens, hundreds. And if you're watching this and you're struggling, if you feel like Aaliyah felt, I need you to hear me. Your life matters. You matter. And there are people who will help you. People who will listen. People who will sit with you in the darkness until you can see light again." Keisha was crying openly now. Her mother, her sisters, her aunt, all of them weeping. But they stood tall, shoulders back, honoring their girl by refusing to hide their pain. "Now," Steve said, wiping his own face, "we're going to play this game. And we're going to play it for Aaliyah. Every point, every answer, every moment. For her." The game resumed, but it was different now. The audience wasn't just watching, they were witnessing. They were part of something bigger than entertainment. Every time the Williams family got an answer right, the applause felt like prayer. Every time Steve read a question, his voice carried reverence. The Williams family was good. Really good. They moved through the rounds with surprising ease, their answers thoughtful and strategic. Keisha, despite her grief, or maybe because of it, was sharp and focused. Her sisters provided backup, their decades of knowing each other translating into seamless teamwork. Gloria, the matriarch, delivered answers with quiet confidence. Patricia brought unexpected humor, making Steve laugh even through the heaviness. They were winning. Not by a little, by a lot. The Hendersons were gracious, kind, cheering for the Williams family even as they fell behind. Because how could you not? How could you compete with a family playing for a daughter, a sister, a granddaughter who would never take another breath? How could you not root for them? Fast money came the final round, where one family member answers 5 questions in 15 seconds. Then another does the same, hoping their combined answers reach 200 points. Keisha volunteered to go first. She stood at the podium, her hand resting on the empty space beside her, as if touching her daughter. Steve stood close. "You ready?" "No," Keisha said honestly. "But we never are we? We just do it anyway." "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard," Steve replied. The questions came rapid fire. Keisha's answers were quick, instinctive, good. She scored 142 points, not quite enough on its own, but a solid foundation. Her sister Jasmine went next, the studio so quiet you could hear her breathing. She needed 58 points. She got 87. The Williams family had won. The moment the final number appeared on the board, the studio erupted. Not the usual game show applause, but something deeper: cheers mixed with sobs, celebration tangled with grief. The Williams women collapsed into each other, holding on tight, crying and laughing simultaneously. Victory and loss existing in the same space, in the same hearts, in the same breath. Steve Harvey stood back, giving them this moment, but his face was wet. The camera operators were crying. The audience was standing, tissues pressed to faces, hands over hearts. Because this wasn't just a game show win. This was survival. This was a family choosing to show up, even when showing up hurt. This was love refusing to be diminished by death. This was grief transformed into purpose. Keisha finally pulled away from her family and walked towards Steve. She wasn't thinking about cameras or audiences or performances. She was thinking about her daughter, about the girl who would never graduate, never go to college, never fall in love, never become the woman she was meant to be. "We did it, baby," she whispered to the empty air, to the daughter only she could see. "We did it for you." And somewhere in memory, in spirit, in the sacred space where love goes when people die, maybe Aaliyah was smiling. Steve Harvey didn't immediately move to the standard post-win interview. He didn't ask the typical questions about how they felt or what they planned to do with the money. Instead, he did something he had never done in all his years of hosting. He asked the producers to bring chairs onto the stage. 5 chairs, 1 for each woman, and 1 left empty. The audience watched in silence as the crew scrambled to fulfill this unprecedented request. Within moments, 5 chairs formed a semicircle at center stage. The Williams women sat slowly, almost reverently, leaving the 5th chair vacant, a physical reminder of absence that somehow made Aaliyah's presence more palpable, not less. Steve pulled up a chair of his own and sat facing them. No podium, no microphone stand, no barrier between host and guests. Just humans sitting together in the wreckage and wonder of being alive. "I need to tell y'all something," Steve said, his voice low and intimate, meant for this small circle, even though millions would eventually hear it. "And I don't talk about this often. I don't talk about it because, I'm Steve Harvey. I'm supposed to be funny. I'm supposed to make people laugh. I'm supposed to be the guy who has it all together." He paused, gathering himself. The studio held its breath. "But my family has struggled with mental health too. Depression, anxiety, dark thoughts that don't make sense to people who haven't had them." His voice cracked. "And for the longest time, we didn't talk about it. Because in our community, you don't talk about that stuff. You pray it away. You tough it out. You don't admit that you're struggling because struggling means you're weak, right?" Keisha nodded, tears streaming down her face, recognizing her own story in his words. "Wrong," Steve said firmly. "That mentality is killing us. It's killing our children. It's killing people who could be saved if they just felt like they could say, 'I'm not okay. I need help.'" He looked directly at Keisha. "Tell me about your daughter. Not about how she died. About who she was, what she loved, what made her laugh." Keisha's breath hitched. People always asked about the suicide, about the details, about whether there were signs. But rarely did anyone ask about Aaliyah. the full, complex, beautiful person she had been before she became a tragedy. She loved art, Keisha began, her voice soft but steady. Watercolors especially. She would spend hours painting these incredibly detailed pieces, flowers and landscapes, and abstract designs. Our house was full of her art. Still is. She smiled through her tears. She used to leave paintings on my pillow as surprises, just because, to make me smile. She sounds beautiful, Steve said gently. She was. She was so beautiful. And smart. And funny. God, she was funny. She could do this perfect impression of you, actually. Keisha laughed, the sound watery but real. She would puff up her chest and say, "Survey says," and we'd die laughing. The audience laughed too, grateful for the moment of lightness, for permission to remember that joy and grief can coexist. "She sounds like someone I would have loved to meet," Steve said, "and I'm honored that you brought her here today, that you left space for her. Because that's what love does, isn't it? It makes space. Even when the person can't physically be there, love makes space." Gloria, Keisha's mother, spoke up for the first time. "We didn't know she was hurting. She hid it so well. And that's what I want parents to understand. Sometimes our kids are suffering and we can't see it. Not because we're bad parents, but because they're good at hiding it. Because they don't want to burden us. Because they think they're protecting us. And that's why what you're doing matters," Steve said. "This mental health program you're starting. Tell me about it." Keisha straightened slightly, purpose replacing some of the pain in her expression. "We're calling it Aaliyah's Place. It'll be a space at our community center where teenagers can come for free counseling, support groups, art therapy, because Aaliyah loved art, and just a safe place to be honest. A place where 'I'm fine' isn't the only acceptable answer. We want kids to know they can say, 'I'm struggling,'" Tamara added. "And instead of judgment or lectures, they'll get support. They'll get help. They'll get a chance to heal before it's too late." "We're partnering with mental health professionals, local therapists who are donating their time," Jasmine continued. "And we're creating peer support groups where kids can talk to other kids who understand. Because sometimes," Patricia said quietly, "the loneliest feeling in the world is thinking you're the only one who feels the way you feel." Steve nodded, his face reflecting the weight of their words. "How much money do you need to make this happen?" Keisha glanced at her family, then back at Steve. "The prize money from today will get us started. Cover the first 6 months of operation, but we're going to fundraise. We're going to apply for grants. We're going to do whatever it takes to keep it running. Because if we can save even one life, just one, it will all be worth it." "One life," Steve repeated. "You know what's crazy? Aaliyah's death, this terrible, heartbreaking tragedy, is going to save lives. Plural. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Kids who feel like she felt are going to walk into Aaliyah's place and find hope. Find help. Find a reason to stay." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, speaking directly to the camera. "If you're watching this, and you're thinking about suicide, I need you to listen to me. I need you to hear what I'm saying. Your life has value. Your story isn't over. The pain you're feeling right now, it's temporary. It doesn't feel temporary. I know it doesn't. It feels permanent and inescapable, and like it will never end. But it will. It can. If you reach out. If you ask for help." He paused, letting the words settle. "Call the Suicide Prevention Hotline. Text 988. Talk to a counselor at school. Tell a parent, a friend, a teacher, someone. Because you matter. You matter more than you know. And this world needs you in it." The studio was silent except for the sound of crying. Not dramatic sobbing, but quiet weeping, the kind that comes from deep recognition, from hearing truth spoken aloud, from being seen. Steve turned back to the Williams women. "You know what you're doing? You're taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and turning it into the best thing that could happen to someone else. That's not just brave. That's holy. That's sacred. That's what love looks like when it refuses to quit." Keisha reached across the space between them and took Steve's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for letting us do this, for giving us this platform, for understanding." "No," Steve said, his voice thick. "Thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for choosing to keep living even when living hurt. Thank you for honoring your daughter by helping other people's daughters. Thank you for reminding all of us what really matters." He stood, and the women stood with him. And then, spontaneously, the entire studio stood. The audience rose as one, applauding not for entertainment, but for courage, for transformation, for the holy work of turning grief into grace. The Williams women stood together, 4 women and 1 empty chair, and let themselves be seen, in their pain, in their purpose, in their refusal to let tragedy have the final word. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep breathing, keep showing up, keep loving even when love means living with a hole in your heart that will never fully heal. And sometimes, just sometimes, television becomes testimony. They decided to air it in full, every word, every tear, every moment of raw, unfiltered humanity. Because some stories are too important to edit, too sacred to sanitize, too necessary to soften. The response was immediate and overwhelming, but not in the way anyone expected. Within the first hour, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline reported a 340% increase in calls. By morning, the number had climbed higher. Text lines were flooded. Crisis counselors worked overtime. But here's what mattered. People were reaching out. People who had been suffering in silence were finally asking for help. A 15-year-old girl in Michigan named Sarah had been planning her suicide for weeks. She had written the note, chosen the method, set the date. But that Thursday evening, her mother insisted they watch Family Feud together, a small tradition they'd maintained since Sarah was little. Sarah watched Keisha Williams talk about her daughter, watched Steve Harvey speak directly to kids like her, and something broke open inside her chest. After the show ended, Sarah turned to her mother and said 6 words that would save her life. "Mom, I need to tell you something." A father in Oregon named Marcus hadn't spoken to his teenage son in months. Not really spoken, just surface conversation about homework and chores. The distance between them felt insurmountable. But after watching the episode, Marcus knocked on his son's bedroom door. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Really talk?" That conversation lasted until 3 a.m. The son admitted he'd been struggling with depression for over a year. The father admitted he'd noticed but didn't know how to help. They found a therapist together the next day. A college student in Florida posted the clip on social media with the caption, "This is why I'm still here." The post went viral, generating thousands of comments from people sharing their own stories of survival, of struggle, of reaching out for help. The shame that had kept mental health in shadows began to crack. Aaliyah's place opened 6 months later in October, occupying a renovated space in the community center where Keisha had taught Sunday school when Aaliyah was small. The walls were painted purple, Aaliyah's color, and covered with artwork created by local teenagers. A mural near the entrance featured Aaliyah's portrait surrounded by butterflies, a symbol of transformation and hope. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew over 300 people. Local news covered it. Mental health advocates spoke. And Steve Harvey flew in from Los Angeles on his own dime to be there. He didn't announce it publicly, didn't seek recognition. He simply showed up because that's what family does. "This is what happens when love refuses to quit," he said at the ceremony, standing next to Keisha. "This is what happens when tragedy becomes testimony, when pain becomes purpose." In its first year, Aaliyah's place served over 800 teenagers, free counseling sessions, art therapy workshops, peer support groups where kids could say, "I'm struggling," and hear, "Me too," instead of silence. 3 school districts partnered with the program. 5 more community centers across the state requested guidance on starting similar initiatives. And the lives saved? Impossible to quantify. How do you count the teenager who walked in thinking about suicide and walked out with a safety plan and a therapist's number? How do you measure the parent who learned to ask better questions? How do you document the moment when a kid realizes they're not alone? Keisha Williams kept teaching 4th grade. She kept showing up for her students, kept stocking granola bars in her desk, kept being the kind of teacher who notices when a child is struggling. But she was different now. Grief had changed her, yes, but so had purpose. She carried Aaliyah with her everywhere, not as a burden but as a mission. Every year on the anniversary of Aaliyah's death, the Williams family returned to Family Feud, not to play, but to share an update. To remind viewers that healing isn't linear, that grief doesn't have an expiration date, but that life continues, that love continues, that hope continues. Steve Harvey made it a tradition to feature mental health awareness during every season, bringing on families with similar stories, creating space for conversations that television usually avoided. "Entertainment can do more than entertain," he said in an interview. "It can educate, it can heal, it can save lives." The Williams family still wears purple on Thursday's Aaliyah's Day, the day they used to watch Family Feud together. They still leave an empty chair at family dinners. They still say her name out loud because silence doesn't honor the dead, remembering does. And somewhere, in hundreds of communities across the country, teenagers walk into spaces created by people who understand that asking for help isn't weakness, it's courage. That depression isn't a character flaw, it's an illness. That suicide isn't the only option, it's just the most permanent one. Because one mother's grief became a movement. One family's courage became a catalyst. One empty chair on a game show stage became a reminder that absence doesn't mean forgotten, that death doesn't diminish love, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is transform our pain into someone else's hope. Sometimes, television doesn't just entertain, it heals. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and share so the world never forgets moments like these. This is Stories Left Behind, where human stories are never lost.